In this episode of the podcast, I'm really pleased to be joined by Clare Treston, who's the creator of The Where and the Why. Claire's worked with hundreds of businesses, taking them through her unique strategic planning workshops to help the businesses define their moonshot goal and then rally the team around that goal with a shared purpose. Claire's just written a book, which is awesome, and it's about how to do this within your own organization. And Claire, I'm really glad to be talking to you about this topic. Thanks for making the time. This is a super important topic for startup founders because coming up with a moonshot, I guess, is by definition what every startup's trying to do. You know, they're all trying to create ambitious businesses. But I think I'm really interested to learn what you've found in working with what I guess is now hundreds of businesses, right? In going through this whole process and how to apply that to early stage businesses. So
Yeah, correct.
let's start with what problem you're solving, because as a mentor who's worked with lots of startup founders, I always like to start with, what's the problem? Why do you need to do this? And it seems to me like the problem is that strategic planning is actually really hard. So can you just talk a little
Yes.
bit about why you've developed this kind of methodology and these workshops and now written about this stuff to help people do this better?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me, Colin. I'm very excited to be on your pod. So, the problem that I am solving, and that's why I've written my book, and I'm so glad that you've got a copy as well, is that strategic planning is really complex and it's difficult for people to remember sort of where they're going and why they're going there on a daily basis. And especially for frontline employees to connect with the bigger vision of the business and understand every day how they're contributing to the bigger picture. It really helps with that. And it also helps just the leaders communicate to everybody in the organization where they're going and why they're going there.
Yeah. It's still, I mean, it sounds easy when you put it like that. It sounds like something everyone should be able to do. But I mean, I've worked with a lot of startup teams where, I mean, I know you talk about this in the book a lot, the being able to articulate the plan, like in a short sentence or two. I've spoken to so many startup founders and said, okay, so what's the vision? Like, what are you building here? And 5 minutes later, they're still talking, and I still don't know what their
hmm
vision is. Why is that so
hmm
hard?
Absolutely. And it is hard. And I mean, that's why I've written the book, is because I've literally have done this hundreds of times and I've figured it out, and I've got it to be really punchy and really two succinct statements, a moonshot statement and a purpose statement. And they're very short and they're very catchy and everyone can remember them. But to get it down to two very succinct statements is definitely an art. So that's why I've written the book, because there's like a process that I've done with literally hundreds of SMEs all over Australia.
Do you want to just talk through the process? I know you do this in a very systematic way, so it's not a random brainstorming session that ends up with some output that everyone agrees with. Do you want to just talk through like what does best practice look like from your point of view in terms of how teams can get together and say, right, what is our moonshot, what's our vision, and
Mhm.
agree on that?
Yes, so very much co-creation is a really key part of the process. And the idea with the where and the why is it taps into the rational and the emotional system. So the moonshot is a rational goal that everybody can sort of go, okay, that's where we're going. And then the purpose, I like to use the analogy that that's the rocket fuel. So that's the heart and the passion that will get you to the destination. And it's the sort of thing that people talk about, particularly in challenging times when things get hard, is when they come back to the purpose. So yeah, it's like the process that I go through that I document in the book so that people can do the process themselves. So the moonshot, for example, it's a matter of coming up with a vision for the future of the company. I suggest in 3 years' time. So, for example, you could say by the end of this decade, so by 2030, this is what we want the whole company to look like. They flesh out like quite a detailed vision. So, what products and services are we going to offer in 3 years? What geographies are we going to be in? What's our team and culture like? So, answering all those types of detailed questions. And usually from that process, one thing sort of comes to the fore as the moonshot, the goal that everybody can rally around. So it starts with quite an elaborate process. And I encourage people to come up with their own vision independently and then bring that to the table together and discuss that together. and then agree on what that vision is, and then also agree on a singular moonshot goal as well.
So you're talking about getting people within the team, whether they're founders or employees, all to contribute their own kind of version of that before everyone kind of meets to
Yeah, I
discuss?
mean, depending how big the team is, so it can get a
Mm.
bit unwieldy. But for example, I've facilitated groups of up to 15 people, and it's actually quite powerful if you get everybody in that team involved. But obviously, if you're getting into bigger organizations, it gets a bit trickier. So in those instances, you would have the leadership team. But if, there's also some true believers, so people that, you know, you just know who those people are, that they really want to be on board and come on that journey with the company in the longer term. So you might select some of those people. Also, you might just throw it open and say, if anyone wants to contribute, they can. And, you can aggregate those kind of inputs using AI or that kind of thing, and get everybody's involvement if they choose to.
Hmm. Um,
Yeah.
I guess the challenge for a lot of the teams that I work with is probably at the other end of that spectrum. It's, I'm a
Yes.
sole founder, or
Hmm.
I've got, it's me and one other person, and
Yeah,
we have
absolutely.
aspirations of building a big team. How do you do
Yeah.
this if it is like a really small team or even a
Oh,
sole
that's
founder?
solopreneur. Yeah, that's
Hmm.
fine. So it's similar. You do a similar process, and you just do answering all those questions, where do we want to be in all aspects of the business, and documenting that. And it helps if you have someone like yourself, Colin, or, a coach or a mentor or a friend that you can kind of
Hmm.
talk that through and refine it a little bit. Or even, AI is quite good. So you could have a chat with AI about that and sort of validate it with your AI friend if you
Yeah.
don't have somebody else to lean on. But yeah, it's a similar process. You kind of flesh out that bigger vision, and then you also try to drill down on one moonshot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wish more people did this. I really like acronyms, and I know that you've put a couple of really helpful acronym kind of methodologies in the book. So, can we start with the moonshot stars? That's right, isn't it?
Mhm. Yes.
Do you want to
So,
just talk about what stars is all about? Because I
yeah,
think this is really
sure.
helpful for people.
Yes. So, and I don't think sort of a similar, sort of guide exists for moonshots elsewhere in the world. So, and I tried to have it. I did try to get moon to spell out, but that was a bit tricky. So we've got stars, which is pretty close.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So first of all, it should be a stretch goal. So the S
Mm.
in the stars is stretch. So I suggest it should be 80% impossible, 20% possible. And then T stands for tangible, so it should be time bound and measurable. The A is aspirational, so it's really exciting for the team to sort of rally around and get behind. It's relevant, so that's where the 20% possible comes in. And then, so it's within sort of the realm of possibility and within the capabilities of what the business actually does. And
Mm.
then the last part is that S is singular. So it's
Yeah.
just one big chunky goal that sort of everybody gets excited about.
It sounds really sensible. I mean, this is the problem, though, isn't it? That a lot of people come up with moonshots that are just not a stretch goal. For example, we want to,
Hmm.
have a 10% year on year increase in profits, and I always ask people, like, what if you put 10 times that, whether it's a profit goal, revenue goal, or
Mm-hmm.
customers or whatever. And I know a lot of investors do the same thing. If a founder shows up and says, "Hey, we want to raise $500,000, often they'll ask questions like, well, what if we gave you 5 million? What if it was 20 million? Like, what would you
Hmm.
do? How much faster could you go?
Yes. And it's actually quite fun in workshops that I facilitate, if there's a number in there, which usually there is because it's a moonshot, so it's measurable, I play with that number in front of everyone.
Mm.
And, people kind of freak out, or, you can feel the energy change if you add another zero, or, you'd add an extra couple of, commas in there. And it's just fun to play with and sort of imagine a little bit, which is what moonshotting is about.
Yeah. What's your experience in terms of teams where there isn't a clear shared vision, particularly when it comes to the moonshot? Okay, this is the kind of big vision that we've got over the next few years. Is that
Mhm.
something that teams typically can reconcile and say, Oh, okay. Well, I can now see that there is a path to this moonshot. Like, how does that dynamic work? And if you're a startup founder, like bringing it back to the challenge a lot of small founding teams have, the moonshot can often seem very unrealistic and very
Mm-hmm.
aspirational because
Mm-hmm.
by definition you're doing business model innovation. It's not like you can say, hey, there's a bunch of companies that have already done exactly this, because hopefully you're, if not the first, certainly one of the first.
Yes. So, yeah, particularly for innovation moonshots, I can understand. And actually, NASA, when they were doing that, so theirs was the original innovation moonshot. And when they did the moonshot goal, which was obviously really, really 80% impossible, probably more.
Mm.
So, what they did was it is called stepping stone goals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really lovely. They call them stepping stones threaded together, forming a pathway to the moon. So what I tell people to do is I do the 3-year goal, because a 1-year goal isn't getting you to think for far enough ahead. So do the 3-year goal, but then think, okay, what are we going to do this year?
Mm.
And then make maybe 6 or 7 stepping stone projects that are going to help you implement actions this year that will put you on the pathway towards that goal.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, that really makes sense. And I guess if you overlay on that the kind of lean startup approach that says, constantly be retesting your assumptions about, what's possible and what's happening out there in the market in terms of, how this resonates with customers, for example. Um, do you see people doing that? Do you see them kind of go, oh, okay, we've got our moonshot, we've got a plan for let's say 3 years, but I mean, do people go out every 6 months and say, all right, does it still make sense? Are we still going the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly with innovation, things change and that sort of thing. And usually people don't change their moonshot, the bigger goals. So they've kind of
Mm,
set that, and the how to, that is wide open. So I suggest, the moonshot usually never changes from my experience over the years.
mm,
The purpose never changes. Sometimes people reach their moonshot a lot quicker than they thought, and then but the purpose never does. So sometimes they meet their moonshot. For example, I've got a client who they had a 4-year moonshot. They did it in 6 months. And so we did a Mars shot workshop. And so then they just made another goal, and I got them to think a little bit more ambitiously. Maybe
mm,
they didn't think ambitiously enough at the start. Um, but yeah, absolutely. The idea of a goal, a moonshot, is that, things change, the market changes, there's AI comes along, stuff's going to change. So the how is always open for, it's messy and you can do whatever, but certainly the purpose should never change. But the
mm,
moonshot, I've not had, because everyone sort of agreed that's the goal and that they've set it. I've
mm,
not actually ever had anyone just drop it or say, we're going to change our moonshot.
mm.
Yeah.
We should talk about purpose because
Yeah.
I think this is really one of the underplayed parts of this. It seems like people, particularly leadership teams, where you've got a strong-willed founder or founding team or whatever, and they'll say, "This is where we're going. Like this is the journey that we're on. Let's
Mm-hmm.
do it." There
Mm-hmm.
often seems to be a missing piece that follows that, or that should follow that, that says, "Well, why are we doing this?
Why?
Why
Yeah.
why should everyone come on that journey?"
Especially a moonshot. I'll tell you, it's really
Yeah.
hard. And I mean, I have in the book, what moonshot feels like when you're doing it right,
Mm,
because often people are exhausted, right? And
sure.
so it's like,
Yeah.
why are we doing this to
Yeah, like
ourselves,
we're all setting
right?
up to do
Yes.
something that's probably, well, like you said, like it's 20%
80%.
achievable. So
Yes, correct.
probably we're not going to succeed. It's going to be really hard. We don't really know exactly how we're going to get there, but let's do it anyway.
Yes, yes, and it's going to be a pain in the ass
Yeah.
because it's so much work usually, and it's like, are you? I mean, this is one of the conversations you need to have is, are we up for this? And I know that's something that you discuss with your founders is, how
Mm,
much personal time and effort and energy are you going to put into this? Because
yeah.
moonshotting is hard. Yes. So, and I have the Ted Lasso, if you if you're, riding a horse and you're not feeling a little bit uncomfortable, you're doing it wrong. So
Yeah.
yeah, you have to be committed to doing a moonshot, and that's where the why comes in. So that's your rocket fuel that's going to get you to the destination. And that's particularly in those challenging times. It's things that you say, okay, it's something to come back to and say,
Mm.
why are we doing this? And to get through those challenges.
So how should teams come up with the why? Like, what's your process for getting them to
Mhm.
co-create the why?
Yes. So this is a little bit trickier than doing a moonshot, because a moonshot's just a goal, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
whereas a purpose, it's like I've got another acronym called ethos.
Mm.
So it's heart. So it's a little bit, usually a bit harder to articulate than a goal is. So that's the head, and then this is the heart. So it's usually a little bit more nuanced.
Mhm.
So yes, the acronym I have is ethos. So it stands for eternal. So it should last forever. True. So you have to walk the talk. It can't be you can't say something and do another. And particularly for employees, we'll see straight through that. So it has to be true. It has to be heartfelt, as I mentioned before. So emotional and oneness. Create a sense of unity. And also, again, simple. So I suggest it shouldn't contain more than 3 concepts. And it
Mm.
should also, I suggest, be less than 7 words. So it's actually people can remember it.
Mm. I'm going to switch into devil's advocate mode, which is my default for most things anyway.
Sure.
How does this work when you've got? I mean, I totally get if you're a startup team and you're developing a cure for cancer, or you're doing something that's going to empower, parents all over the world to better deal with neurodivergent kids, or whatever your thing is. Like, it's
Hmm.
really easy to see that a team of people could get around that goal and say, yeah, we really feel a sense of purpose to go and solve this problem. What about if you're
Yes.
building, I don't know, accounting software for veterinarians or something? Like,
Mhm.
how do you get teams to think about that in terms of what's our purpose and
Yeah,
why are we
absolutely.
doing
So, and it's really common, and actually, a lot of service businesses struggle with this because they don't see the link between what they do and the end user quite often.
it? Mm.
So, service businesses and B2B businesses often struggle with this, but it's actually it's fine. It's so, for example. So I've classified types of purpose statements, and there are kind of the world impact sort of ones, and
Mm.
they absolutely exist. But as I mentioned before, it's important it has to be true.
Mm.
And that can be a stretch. And, it's just not true for a lot of businesses. So you don't want to say something and overreach and be unrealistic. But, everyone's making a difference, whatever they do. So it's
Mm.
figuring out and making those connections. So, and actually, in my experience, the most common purpose about, I would say 50% of my clients have a customer oriented purpose. So it's
Mm.
figuring out the difference that they make to the customer. So
Mm.
I have a client called Infectious Clothing who makes scrubs for hospitals. So but their purpose statement is making people feel great at work.
Mm.
So yeah, and Pete, who was the founder of that business, he used to be a nurse. So, he has a firsthand kind of connection with that as well. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I would say actually the most common purpose statement in my experience is a customer oriented one.
that makes a lot of sense, and that actually lines up pretty well with the experience I've had in working with founders who, like Pete, you mentioned before, they have been the customer. And so
Yes,
I think it's really important. I always test founders on this is, do you really personally understand the pain point that you're trying to address for your customer? And the ideal is that they've been in that role, right? So they
absolutely.
have, very direct understanding. If they haven't been, I always encourage them to go and like try to put yourself in that role. Don't just go
Mm-hmm.
ask a bunch of nurses, if this is something that they experience, like go and do it. Do the role
Absolutely.
and try to get as
Yes.
much kind of tangible experience as possible.
Yes. And that's something that is sort of touched on in my book, but not
Mm.
in depth. But in my workshops, we do actually do some customer persona work because it really
Mm.
helps to make that connection. It
Mm.
helps to make the connection with purpose, but it also helps to make a better moonshot as well.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, what do teams struggle with when it comes to agreeing on and defining their purpose statement? Like when you spend time workshopping this with them, where does most of the kind of facilitation end up going in terms of getting people to, reach a shared view?
So pretty much, so the exercises I go through is reflecting on why they started working at the company, why they stay working at the company, and what they're most proud of at the company. So they're just three really simple questions. It takes 3 minutes, and they articulate that, and then I sort of look at themes. And we also do exercise like they bring things that they think represent the company, and we look for themes in people's responses. But yeah, it is a little bit more touchy feely, a little bit harder to articulate than a moonshot. But yeah, basically we look at responses to those sort of exercises. We cluster the themes around them, and it's things that how do we make an impact on other people's lives is usually themes and things that are, as I mentioned before, it should only consist of three themes.
Yep.
So, which is quite hard to do, to narrow it down. So the things that don't fit into the why area, we put into the how area, and they become the values of the company. So it's narrowing it down to really, okay, what are we really passionate about? What do we get out of bed every morning? And then once you have those themes, then it's actually quite a fun, creative, it's wordplay after that. So you're going, we have these three concepts that we're really passionate about, or less. Two is even better. And then you play word. So AI is great for brainstorming actually how to articulate those words into a purpose statement. Yeah.
I want to come back to pick your brains on how to use AI effectively for that, because I think there's some pitfalls that people fall into.
Oh yes.
Mainly around it telling you what you want to hear rather than
and making
reality.
It sound like a tagline, like not an internal statement. Yes.
Yeah. We'll talk about recruitment for a minute, because it seems to me like having a clear moonshot and a clear purpose statement probably is really helpful when you're recruiting, right? If you're a startup team and you're saying, hey, we're going to bring in our first employee, or maybe in the first 10 employees, like they're really critical to get that fit. It's not like if you're a bigger company, you can say, well, okay, we've got 1,000 people and we're going to recruit for skills first.
Well, and you want to attract some really good talent, right? Yes.
For sure, you want the good talent, but you also want to attract for fit. So would it be fair to say that having this clearly articulated within the business makes it easier to then know whether someone's going to be a fit or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So fit, and also I think from the employees' point of view, they want to go on an exciting journey. Yes. So it's something to sell to them, to go, hey guys, this is where we're going. This is why we're going there. Do you want to be on board? So I think it would also help to attract better talent. And I have heard clients say that they've noticed people putting in more effort at work once this has been established. So yes, but in terms of recruiting, like fit wise, it's articulating, why your company exists, and its place in the world and the journey that you're going on. And then people actually sometimes post workshop, people check out and they say, actually, I don't want to be on this journey. And it's a great thing because it's just kind of, it's a great thing for both, parties, but it's sort of people self-selecting that, I don't know, this sounds like a lot of work. Maybe I don't want to be on this journey. But also it's getting people to say, this is exciting. I want to sign up and be on this journey. So
that's really interesting. Yeah, I guess that's a good outcome all around.
It is, yeah.
I always reckon that it's an interesting test to go to a startup's website, or even if you're looking at their, as I do often, look at their investor pitch deck, and to try and glean from it some of those kinds of things. And looking through some of the stuff that you've got in the book, it seems like it lines up really well with what investors are looking for, in that, they want a very ambitious, properly thought through moonshot. But they also want to know that you've kind of done the thinking to say, well, why are we doing this, and does it really matter? And are we kidding? Is it rational? And all that stuff.
Yeah. And there's a funny story actually, Stuart from Oztix, and I'm sure he won't mind me sharing. And he actually he had investors ask for his business plan, and he just sent the poster with the where and the why on it, and that was
Mm,
it. So,
nice.
like, it was a bit of fun. I mean, he did follow it up with some other documents, but
Yep.
he said, this is it, this is us. And they have it on their wall, and every month they communicate to the team how they're tracking.
Yep.
Yeah, they fully went all in with their moonshot, and they're still on track. So they're doing really well.
Excellent. There's nothing worse than seeing, particularly for like an early stage startup, nothing worse than a 50-page business plan with 5-year projections and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd much
Yes.
rather have a one
A
page.
poster. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Why don't we talk about putting this into practice? Because I know that when
Hmm.
you run workshops and you talk about this also in the book, there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of value in thinking through the moonshot and a purpose statement, and but none of that matters until you actually put it into practice, right? So
Yep.
you've then got to go into, okay, how do we implement this? What's your
Yes.
advice for teams in terms of taking that kind of thinking that goes into the where and the why to
Hmm.
then say, well, how are we going to do it? Like, how do we make this
Hmm.
actually happen?
Yeah, so that's sort of the last thing we do at the end of a workshop is basically we've got major projects for the moonshot, because that's going to be okay. That's going to be a big piece of work. So we get, okay, that's going to be 6 projects for the next 12 months. And then we break that down into smaller tasks.
Mhm.
And then we assign leads and start dates to each of those tasks. And then similarly for the values and the purpose, sort of it might be onboarding people who haven't been in that workshop as to, testing the purpose and the values, and is everyone on board, and getting feedback and tweaking it if they need to. So yeah, it's pretty much, and a lot of people have project management, software already in place. So it's just breaking down, okay, that's our 3-year goal. We're going to have these projects for this year that align to that, and then just breaking it down into tasks, assign leads, assign timelines. You can use smaller SMART goals or OKRs or other things,
Mhm.
but as long as they all align to that bigger moonshot, because that's where you could get into trouble, is if they're goals that don't actually line up with the moonshot, it can pull people or confuse people. So yeah, so it's just important it all aligns to the moonshot.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you get people to do this on a page. Like, I'm a big fan of one-page canvases, or things that force you to distill your thinking down to, like, the really essential points. And I really like. I might put it on the screen, but I like the fact that
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
you really bring this in. So how does that work in terms of getting all of this onto a page? I mean, it sounds like actually non-trivial, because what you're talking about is a multi-year plan for a business that's got a lot of moving parts.
Hmm.
How do you actually get people to take all of that and put it on a single page or a poster?
Well, I force people in my workshop, but like literally, I mean, I facilitate it in the workshop, and it's not that hard. It's just I mean, it's just another job that you have to do, and and it takes, I mean, an hour, half an hour to actually do it, and then everyone's accountable, and then you come back to it every month or a couple of months, and and check in and see how people are progressing, and people have accountability, and or you just use your normal project management software,
Mm.
and yeah, just work through it like any other project. Yeah.
I like that. Just force them. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
make it
and
happen.
I force them, but I also give people gold stars. So and on my template there's a column for gold stars, where people, once they've achieved it, they get a gold star emoji.
Yeah.
But and the templates are actually available for free on my website, thewhereandthewhy.com/template. So if anyone wants to grab any, they can do there. Yeah.
Yeah, superb. I want to come back to AI, because you mentioned before that teams can use AI to help them kind of think through some of this
Hmm.
stuff and maybe sanity check it.
Hmm.
I have seen people using AI really effectively, and I've seen people that, well, I've met a bunch of startup founders who said, "Oh, I asked Claude or ChatGPT if I was doing the right thing, and if my business makes sense, or if this product looks really valuable to my target customer," and it said, "Yeah, it looks really awesome." And then I've got a couple of workflows that I've been building that kind of do that, but maybe in a slightly more cynical way, and it'll say, "Well, here are 5 competitors that you know you didn't mention.
Mm-hmm.
What's with that?" So
Yeah.
how do you get people to use AI, or how do you use AI effectively to make sure that you're actually getting something that's balanced?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of AI. I really like it. I do have my entire book sitting in my AI, which is very useful because it's it's like having my brain in there. But for example, the structures that I have, so the stars test and the ethos test, for example, you could put those elements into AI and go, we're developing our moonshot and we want it to meet this criteria.
Mhm.
And then put in the moonshot you're thinking of, and then it will run and check and say, is it a stretch goal? Is it tangible? Is it aspirational? Is
Mhm.
it relevant? And is it singular? So it can give you feedback on, and that it's a pretty simple criteria.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you could use it, like that sort of thing. And in terms
And do
of
you
the
set it up as a project? Sorry, do you set that up within? Is it
yes,
Claude you're using
yes,
primarily for
yes,
this?
yeah, as a
Yeah.
project, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And so you'll give it project instructions and then the book and other
Mhm.
stuff that you can give it as documents to refer to.
Reference.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. And in terms of, you mentioned competitors, were you talking about that in terms of a similar moonshot or a similar purpose statement?
No, more so from the point of view of saying, well, okay, where do we sit in terms of differentiation between our company and existing things that are out there, so that you don't have to be the only business doing a particular thing, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, if you think you're the only one, and there's 5 really major, well-funded competitors that you just don't know about, like that's a
Oh,
red flag.
okay. Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's something I always work with founders on. I've had people ask me, "Oh, what search engine are you using?" Because I've never found any of these. So I think
Ah,
there's
okay.
actually
Interesting.
there's a
Yes.
challenge. I actually think I was talking to a psychologist about this a while ago, and I think there's actually psychological barriers that prevent people. They call it post-decisional cognitive dissonance, where if you make a decision that says we're heading down this path and the whole team's on this journey and off we go, any information that's
Oh,
presented to
right.
you after you've
Yes,
made
I
that decision
see. Yes,
creates
yes.
cognitive dissonance. And so the brain tends to go, I'm just not going to hear that. And so I
Right.
think
Yes,
that's a really
yes.
interesting thing. And I guess in your role as a coach, it's probably really valuable for you to say, well, look, here's a thought that I think we need to put on the table for discussion, whether it's to do with
Mm-hmm.
a competitor or any other thing,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there is a psychological aspect, it seems, where teams at some point they just don't want to hear things that
Yes.
conflict with their kind of agreed vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess this process doesn't really cover competitors much, but I guess, it would make sense, from a risk analysis perspective for every business to do that, and just sort of be aware, or scan, at least every quarter or whatever, I guess, and just sort of
Yeah,
be aware of what else is out there.
yeah,
So, and, that, I guess that's part of the how part that I mentioned. So,
mm,
because the environment's changing constantly. So I guess you've always got to be aware of that. I guess you could put that down, in your, so one of the first things I know I've got it sort of as a task to immediately do after your moonshot has been formulated is to you sort of do a business case and do a, bit of a sanity check on it before you do
mhm.
go, this is it sort of thing. So,
Sure.
yeah, so I guess it would probably come into that. But obviously, yeah, every business should be doing that constantly, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I even just like the idea of setting up some Google alerts. If you
Yeah,
know about
totally.
some companies that are in your space that are competitors or that are doing interesting things, like set up a Google alert so that every week in your inbox you get
Absolutely.
like what's going on.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Great idea. Yeah.
I want to talk about how to apply some of this in really early stage startups. So a lot of the companies that I work with are, sole founder or a small team of co-founders.
Hmm.
Often they start part time, which I think is
Yep.
really rational. I always worry when
Yes.
people say, "Hey,
Absolutely.
I've quit my
Yes.
day job to pursue this
Side
idea."
hustle. Yes.
So it's sensible to do it stepwise and
Hmm.
validate some stuff before you then go in full time. But what's your experience in working with early stage teams? Where it might
Hmm.
just be a small group of co-founders, and what are the things that, like, what are some practical tips you can give them to make really good use of this kind of time that they've got together thinking about their moonshot and purpose and that sort of stuff.
It's really, really valuable for startups and, co-founders. A lot of the times I've found they're actually frightened to have this conversation.
Mm.
And sometimes they have the conversation and it's such a relief that they have a similar mindset, or, they can have the
Mm.
conversation. And I mean, sometimes they disagree, but it's just so healthy to have that conversation early on and get it out into the open. And especially if you are like, it's a side hustle, it's hard to stay focused if you're doing that. So it's a really helpful process to articulate it, write it down. So writing it down improves the odds of it happening by 42%.
Right.
And then, so for example, having it, beside your mirror or beside your desk or as your desktop background or something, it's just kind of there as a reminder all the time of, hey, remember. And it's hard doing side hustle because you're doing it at night or you're doing it early mornings or you're doing it weekends. So, but if
Mm.
you have that, the poster saying where and why as just a reminder for you,
Mm.
it can help with you just to keep you a bit motivated to go, yes, I'm, committed for this journey, and, remember where you're going and why you're going in. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. On your book, on the front cover, you've got a really nice comment about how important this is from no less than Seth Godin. How'd you get that?
Well, I think he's the most generous person ever. I'm a double Raven, which means I've done the Alt MBA twice.
Mm.
So I've met him like once, and I've just sort of kept in touch. But I guess it's it's the one that no one wants to hear, which is hard work, persistence, generosity. That's how you get Seth's endorsement.
Yeah, well
Yeah.
done. I mean, he's a big deal in terms of
Yes.
the strategy space.
Well, he doesn't
I
endorse everything, so I feel
I'll
very
bet.
special.
No, for
Yes.
sure. I mean, I kind of feel like that's a good example of, I mean, obviously hustle and doing the work to get to a point where he will take an interest in what you're doing. But it's also kind of increasing your surface area for luck. Like I sort of feel like this is an important thing for founders to kind of observe and go, oh, okay. I mean, I speak to a lot of startup founders who say, oh yeah, I'm getting some advice from my accountant or my brother-in-law who started a business or whatever. And I go, well, that's great. Great.
Mm-hmm.
But like, who's the best person on the planet to get advice from? And whether it's
Mm-hmm.
getting advice or getting a testimonial that says what you're doing is great or whatever, like who's the best or who are the group of people that are the best on the planet for this? And they often go,
Absolutely.
oh, I've never really
Yes.
thought about that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan. So I subscribe to Masterclass. So it's got, all the famous people giving classes. So yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what moonshotting's about, right? You got to dream big. So yeah, I was terrified to ask Seth for an endorsement, and I sent it off one night and I woke up the next morning and there it was in my inbox. So, you got
Nice.
to give it a crack, right?
For sure. Yeah. No, well done. Um, Before we wrap up, Claire, any last bits of advice or things that you've picked up in working with all of these businesses that you've helped over the years that might be useful to startup founders?
I think it's like think bigger and go higher. And having a 3-year horizon is really useful. So yeah, and I mean that's what moonshotting is about. So, but quite often people achieve their moonshot a lot quicker than they think. So, but when they've said it, they think it's a bit crazy and we can't do this. And there was someone said, I feel sick. Like
Right.
it was like a 3-year moonshot. It's like, I feel sick. And then he did it in maybe 3 months. So yeah, it's like, I mean, that's what moonshotting is like big picture, thinking a bit crazy. And then also not being disappointed when you don't hit it. So I call that the phases of the moon, right? So if it's 80% impossible and you still get, 40% there, you've still done double of what you thought was possible. So yes, yeah, I think it's go bigger, go big or go home. Yeah.
I like that.